So I have finally finished Rhythm of War. I can finally say that I am done with the Stormlight archives, and what a journey it has been. This is going to be a pretty difficult book for me to talk about. One, because it is obviously book 4 in a series, but just in general, it feels like everything that happens, it's not really conducive to a super good spoiler-free discussion. So I'm going to do my best to keep it pretty spoiler-free, and maybe at the end I'll have some more spoilery stuff, but I will let you know if that's the direction that this review goes. Now, let's go ahead and get some of the basic stuff out of the way. I gave this a solid 4-star ranking. I think that it is probably my third of the Stormlight books. I think my ranking would probably go Words of Radiance, Way of Kings, Rhythm of War, Oathbringer. And I don't know if most people feel that way. I feel like I always hear Rhythm of War kind of dogged on, or, you know, most frequently put in the last place as far as rankings go. And I can see why between this book and all of the other ones, people would feel that way. This is a much more narrow, focused story. It's barely even takes place on the whole continent. You are really dealing with a couple different characters, kind of dealing with some things. And actually, I broke them down into what, to me, this story kind of, entailed. And for me, it was, you had Navani and all of the science and everything that happened there and in the tower. You have Kaladin and his really internal struggle of what is life, what is his meaning, what is he supposed to be doing, depression, despair, happiness, what is his direction. Everything that's going on in Shadesmar, so you know that's really, I won't even say who the characters are. Actually, yeah, I will. That is Shallan and Shallan end up in Shadesmar, and everything that happens there, we're also, there's some big, implications on things that happen there. And then the smallest part of it, and maybe some of the most interesting stuff, is Dalinar and some of the war effort stuff. And I say interesting, and it's all happened so quickly there at the end, but there are some, again, big things that come about from Dalinar and being gone and fighting the war that they have been fighting. So normally I would break a review up into things I liked and didn't like, but for this story, I think I'm going to kind of use those 4 main blocks that I talked about and kind of just give my opinions on those as the storylines throughout this book. I will mention some positives and negatives throughout everything. So for me, I think the first thing I do have to mention is there is a chapter in this book that might be the best chapter of any book I have ever read, and that is chapter 108. And I'm not going to say what happens in the chapter or anything, but that chapter is in a stratosphere with only 3 other chapters that I can think of. 2 of them are from my favorite trilogy, The Remembrance of the Earth Past, better known as the 3-Body Problem. The second book, Dark Forest, and the third book, Descent, both have chapters and things that happen in those books that are, I think about them all the time still. And it's crazy because I think I read those both in 2019. And those are, just moments that have stuck with me. The third one is in book 12, The Gathering Storm of the Wheel of Time. Once again, obviously not going to spoil book 12 of a series, but there is a moment with a character in that book that I think about it all the time still. And chapter 108 in Rhythm of War is going to be another one of those moments that I think is just going to stick with me for a really long time. The emotional weight and the impact that chapter had on me, man, like I said, it's special. And, it's not something that happens very often, obviously, and it is always special. And Sanderson did just a masterful job of pulling things in from earlier in the series, things going on right now, and just made you feel emotion in such a powerful way that, it's going to just be with me forever. And that chapter also kind of exemplifies what I mean when this story isn't as big and epic as even the other books in this series are, especially Oathbringer. I feel like at the end of Oathbringer, with the battle that's happening, it's just so big, epic, sprawling. There's all this magic and everything is so huge. And in this story, we really focus and we narrow down on a few specific characters and kind of things happening with them. And chapter 108 is like the peak of that being done pretty much anywhere I have ever read, which is just an amazing thing to say. I'd had to mention that just because that chapter is just so special, and it is going to be something that, like I said, I think about all the time. Now, let's go ahead and I'll talk about each one of those sections and some things I liked and didn't like from each of them. So we'll go ahead and start with Navani and all of the science that she ends up doing inside of the tower. Navani's angle in this story is interesting because she's not really a character that I ever felt like I really needed a lot more from. She was always just kind of you know, a part of the crew, but not like too in depth. And this was really a book of herself, proving that she is worth being there, I think. And, you know, just the struggle, and I mean, the revelations she makes are huge. And I could see why some people wouldn't like basically how scientific some of it was. I found it kind of interesting. I don't think it really takes any of the magic away from the world personally. I do think that maybe it makes it a little bit more solid and real and, you know, like a science, which, you know, there are some great sci-fi, you know, series that basically just say science is magic and all of that. But I do have some problems here. I don't think that what happens with her would have happened. I think she would have been used as bait. I think, you know, she would have been taken more advantage of, and not that she wasn't, but I just feel like it wasn't executed as well. And just, I guess I didn't need this. This is one of those storylines in the book that I just didn't need. If I didn't learn pretty much almost any of the information, or at least the depth that we ended up getting from it, obviously the very, very end revelations we get, that's fine. But I didn't actually need to see all the work that was done leading up. And once again, that's like double talk, because we get those really personal moments with her and another character as they're doing this thing. And I don't know if I really needed it. It was still interesting, but I don't know, it was just kind of a perspective that I don't think I needed. And the things that ended up happening with Navani are going to have, you know, obviously Cosmere-wide, you know, expectations and causes and concerns and just everything. But I don't know, maybe I would have liked it better if it came from a different character, one who didn't feel like they came so, not out of left field, because she's always been there, but this was a big step up for her as a character, when I feel like there are other characters I would have liked to have spent a little bit more time with, or we could have shortened the book, because just in general, the pacing in this book is slow. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but this book felt like it took a lot out of me. You know, like I read at least one book in between reading this, because I just felt like I needed something else, because it was slow and it was building and it was building and it was building, and we get the Sanderson at the end. But for me, I could use a little waterfalls before we get to the big one. And, you know, I think Navani's storyline kind of, you know, exemplifies that. It's this slow build of figuring things out. We're building, and bam, all of a sudden it happens. And yeah, you know, this is probably the weakest storyline for me in the book, and it probably gets the most page time. If I had to guess, I'd have to look, but it felt like it at least. So that is kind of how I feel about that. Next up, I think I'll go ahead and talk about Kaladin. And before we get too much into Kaladin himself, I just need to say that I hate his dad. I cannot stand his dad. I can't tell if this is a like or a dislike his dad, because it's done so well. I haven't hated a character like I hate Kaladin's dad in so long. And I won't even say why, what happens, because, you know, spoiler free, but I hate Kaladin's dad. I want horrible things to happen to Kaladin's dad, but at the same time I don't, because I don't want bad things for my boy Kaladin. And so it's this weird conundrum of disagreeing with a character on such a fundamental level. A character who I feel is so stubborn and unwilling to listen to anything except their own stubborn brick wall headed thoughts, that it's frustrating, and it's done so well, but I hate it at the same time. I wish it was different. I don't know. It's that inner family, you know, conflict that is done so well, but man, do I hate his dad, which is unfortunate, because throughout the story, Kaladin is down bad and he is lost and trying to find himself. And it would have been great for him to experience love and affection, commitment, support from his family. And he did not get it when he probably needed it more than anything. His dad is extremely judgmental. I can't think of the word that I want to use, but he just is pious to a fault maybe. And man, it is frustrating. Now, Kaladin's story himself, man, what an arc he goes through on this book. It felt a little derivative, because I feel like we have gotten these kinds of shades from Kaladin, you know, throughout the series, but it really comes to a head here. And it's great. And it is one of the best character arcs it's up there with Rand in The Wheel of Time. I always say that Rand is the greatest fictional character of all time, because if you look at book 1 of The Wheel of Time and book 14 of The Wheel of the Time, I mean, it's just the character change development, and that's really The Wheel of Time's big big draw is all of the character developments, and we're only 4 books in for Kaladin, and the arc he is on is probably going to be able to rival that of Rand, which is crazy to think. I don't know if it will reach the same highs, but it could. And, you know, I'm interested to see what's going to happen going forward, because I feel like Kaladin really needs to take that next step now. And while I'm ready for that to happen, I don't need to see him take another step back so he can take 2 steps forward. I kind of just need to see that progression forward. And for most of this book, it felt like he was taking steps back. And it's frustrating because it's such a good character, but I feel like he also gets lost in the weeds. There are some things that he does in this book that, once again, for pacing reasons, for just length reasons, I think could have been cut out. And so that's 2 of the, we're 2 for 2 on the plot lines I've mentioned where I feel like they're a little bloated. And I say that at the same time as I think Sanderson deserves as many pages as he wants. I think he has shown throughout his career that he is able to deliver and execute on threads that he has laid, you know, throughout his stories. And so for me to say that, I'm sure there's build up and there's things that Sanderson's building to that would be lessened by taking away pages, but also at the same time, 1,200 pages is a lot to commit to when I feel like between Kaladin and Navani already, there's at least 50 pages or so, maybe even a little bit more, that could have been taken out that we didn't really need. Next up, let's go ahead and shift to Shallan and the stuff happening in Shadesmar. This was fascinating. I find Shadesmar to be super cool and a really interesting concept. It feels a little bit like the dream world from Wheel of Time, but in a completely different way. It's, you know, having an alternate reality inside of another reality, and how cognitively that is connected through, I don't even really understand it. I'll talk about some of the Cosmere stuff in here at some point, but it's fascinating. And I will say, I need some more resolution with Shallan. She really has frustrated me the last 2 books. I have not been a fan of the split personalities that have been going on with her. I think I said that in my Oathbringer review as well, that the split personality is just something that hasn't really worked for me for quite a while. I understand it's like a trauma response and she's protecting herself, she's guarding herself, she doesn't want to feel this pain or take, you know, accountability for things that she's done, or she's afraid of the person who she is or could be, all of these things. But man, it's a little tiring, you know. And I will say, I think this is probably the one section of this book that I felt like needed more page time. I do think that we spend a lot of time there, and it felt like hours went by. And I was listening to this on audio, it felt like 10, 15 hours went by and we got no references back to what was going on in Shadesmar. There's this huge gap that, man, I wish we had been back in Shadesmar. This probably was my most enjoyable section, is the stuff in Shadesmar. It's really close with that and some of the stuff that happens with Dalinar that I'll get to. But I don't know, seeing how the Spren are really their own thing, because even up until this point, I knew they had their own culture and everything, but they just kind of felt like they were kind of this ethereal thing that not that they didn't matter, but they just didn't have substance. And that could not be further from the truth after some of the things we learn in Shadesmar. All of the things that happen, and it's not just Shallan, Adolin actually has some really good moments throughout this book. I should have mentioned some of the stuff, you know, he does a really great job with Kaladin, and he does a really good job in Shadesmar, and I like that he is a different kind of character from most of the characters we were following. And the stuff in Shadesmar really kind of exemplifies him as a character, his ability to kind of do what he thinks is right in his own way, which is different from his father. The Shadesmar stuff gave him the opportunity to shine, and I'm really glad that it did. I still have a lot of questions when it comes to Shadesmar, and I guess I'll go ahead and just talk about some of the Cosmere stuff. I got a lot of the Cosmere references here. I've been reading the Cosmere as a whole, like a whole series. I know this is like the Stormlight Archive, it's its own thing, but because I've read all of the other Cosmere stuff up until this point from this list that I've been following, I got a lot of it, and I still feel like I'm missing out on so many different things. I'm gonna have to watch some videos or talk to some people who are some real Cosmere experts, because there was stuff that I was like, I think that's a reference to this and this and that, and some of that happens in Shadesmar and how all those things are gonna be connected, but that's a huge positive. I just needed to sneak in that I do love the Cosmere stuff. And some of that, I should talk about Dalinar and what he's doing as well. I think this is pretty clearly the least, focused aspect of this story. And it was fine. It all just kind of built to the very end. And I feel like the time that we did spend with him, we probably could have just skipped a lot of that too. So that's 3 out of 4 that I think we really could have just been like, hey, this is happening. Okay, let's skip ahead. And even though it kind of did that, I felt like it could have been even more. But the implications that happen with Dalinar at the end of this book, man, they are going to shape the Cosmere for the future. And I'm really interested. I'll be honest, I didn't think that the Cosmere was going to be this intertwined this early, and I know the Lost Metal apparently is super, super Cosmere heavy, and that's the next book I'm reading in my read through. And but it makes me feel like book 5 of Stormlight is going to be, you know, dangerous for people who haven't read the Cosmere. And when I say dangerous, I mean they're not going to understand a lot. They're going to be questioning what's going on. What are all these references? If you're only a Stormlight reader, I think you're going to be kind of left in the dark, which I think, you know, is an interesting conundrum for fans of the series. But, you know, at this point, I almost feel like if you're a fan of Stormlight, you've probably read some of the other stuff at least. And I guess I have enough faith in Sanderson, I almost said in Dalinar, in Sanderson to kind of weave it into a way and make it make sense. And I'll be honest, you know, I'm going to need a refresher on some of this stuff. It's a lot to remember. I'm glad that there are going to be online resources and stuff. But, you know, the Dalinar stuff at the end, I'm not sure if it's really what I wanted. You know, it's mentioned in Oathbringer the champions are going to fight. And I'm really curious on how that's going to work. We get some, you know, process of that in this book that I won't talk too much about because of spoiler reasons. But I'm not sure if that's how I want this to go. And I don't know, it's going to be interesting with everything. Some of the last overarching positives that I just kind of want to mention before I kind of finish this up is the plot twists in this book were fantastic. I think that, you know, Sanderson did a great job keeping me on my toes, even though the pace of this story is slow. The fact that multiple times he just got me completely going one way, to bring it back another way, or things that I didn't think would happen, happened. Once again, just fantastic. So that is my review for Rhythm of War. I feel like I sounded really negative on it, and I'm not, because like I said, this is a great book. It's probably a top 10 book in the year for me. We'll have to see when the year wraps up. But if you have not read Rhythm of War, you should go ahead and read it. The Stormlight Archive is great, and I am super excited for book 5 to come out next year, I think it's supposed to. So yeah, but if you want to tell me some Cosmere references I missed, anything down in the comments below, please feel free to. And as always, have a good one.